Hi, Yinnies, and welcome back to a Yin Yoga podcast. If you're new around here, welcome, welcome. If you are a familiar, welcome back. Today, I'm going to have a chat with a friend and colleague. Her name is Janis Isaman, and she is somebody you'll hear in the episode how we connected and the history of that. But one of the reasons that I wanted to have Janis on was specifically to talk about this full circle sort of journey with trauma. Oftentimes in kind of the yoga verse, you'll hear that yin yoga is not an ideal practice for trauma, or isn't trauma sensitive, or isn't trauma informed. And although sometimes that might be the case or not, and again, there's going to be more episodes that will have happened before this that you can listen to learn more about that. Janis's story is a really good example of how there is no one size fits all when it comes to these recommendations. So you'll hear more about her story and her journey as we dive into this. Just a quick content warning that although not in detail, we do talk about some abuse. And so if you are currently working through some stuff as far as sexual abuse or abuse in your own life, and you will find this episode triggering, you may want to just jump over this one and go to the next episode. Okay, here is Janis's bio. Janis is a movement-based specialist. She's based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. She's the founder of My Body Couture, which is a movement therapy studio that provides personalized training and rehabilitation services to clients with chronic pain, injuries, and other movement limitations. Janis has been working in the health and fitness industry for over 2 decades. She has extensive training and experience in various movement modalities, including Pilates, yoga, and functional movement. Janis is known for her holistic and personalized approach to movement therapy, which involves addressing the root cause of the movement limitation rather than treating the symptoms. This includes trauma modalities, and she's trained with Bessel van der Kolk and at the Trauma Center as well as Gabor Mate's Compassionate Inquiry. She believes that every person's body is unique and each session should be tailored to each individual's needs and goals. Janis has helped numerous clients overcome chronic pain and improve their physical, mental health through her innovative and effective approach to movement therapy. So Janis is often one of those people that when people are in pain and they have tried everything else, the massage, the acupuncture, the this, the that, all the things, they end up on her doorstep. And I've actually done some work with Janis as well. We don't talk about that in the episode, but she's helped me with a couple of things as well. And so I can definitely say that her approach is incredibly unique and really diverse as far as the influences that she takes and puts into her tool belt based on all of her training and experience. So if you have some ideas already, some preconceived ideas as to whether or not we should be doing yin yoga when we're dealing with trauma, I think that you will find this episode interesting. All right. Enjoy. Hi, Janis, and welcome to a Yin Yoga podcast.
Hi, Nick.
So a little backstory just for those that are listening is that we actually know each other. Like actually, like for real. So if by the course of this interview you hear a lot of kind of like camaraderie and giggles and like, it's because Janis and I are actually well established as far as like how long we've known each other. So
like in real life,
in real life, not just on the interwebs. Yeah, exactly. So I met you when you had contacted me about doing some private yin sessions, and I don't know how you found me. But then we did, I don't even know, but like quite a few like private yin sessions together back when I was still living in Calgary, which is where you are. And then after that, we became, I would guess we would probably say slowly, once I moved, we kind of slipped into more of like a colleague slash friendish situation.
Yeah.
Like that. So that's all I'll say kind of about our background, because a lot of it'll come out in your story. But so I'm excited to have you here. And I knew that when I was thinking about this particular topic, which I don't know, of course, what we'll name this episode, but that you would be the perfect person to talk about. So what I'd love to start with, though,
You asked me twice, actually. That's how perfect we are.
Yes, I was like, hey, yeah, we already had one booked and I didn't even realize you had an appointment booked. I was like, oh, right, she did that. Okay. So what I would love to do is first just kind of start with, I always start people with their yoga origin story, but with you, it's a little different because you had a whole physical body practice and modality set before you even started yoga. So maybe we could start with, when did you move from whatever it was you were doing with your body for a living and into this, and why? Like, what was the catalyst? Let's start with that, maybe.
So are we going from why am I a movement person, or okay.
Or like how you started, I guess, because it's mostly like Pilates and other forms, like what brought you to that, and then what made you decide to, now I'm going to teach these things.
So we'll start with going way back in my life. This kind of just creates a little bit of an envelope for what was to come. I was not an athletic child. And I probably still am to this day. Like, I'm artistic. I was the yearbook editor. I sang. I did things that were creative and intuitive. And other than really riding my bike, I didn't like anything that related to my body. So, like many people going through the kind of sports curriculum that we call physical education, I hated volleyball. I hate basketball. I hate all of it. I would, and it was rigid. It was team sporty. It was ball oriented. I had bad experiences with it. I would do my best and still get picked last for everything, and rightfully so, because to this day, if you huck a basketball at me, it's probably going to land on the floor behind me. Like, it doesn't work for me. So that builds, though, in your body a whole story about your body, because I think, especially, I grew up in small town Alberta. There was a lot of emphasis put on your sporting ability. The cool kids are the sport kids, and and they have more popularity, and they have more notoriety, and they have more of everything. Whereas, like, the yearbook editor and the person in the choir. Oh, and I was in 4-H, so I did public speaking as well. None of those are cool things to do. So it just builds this whole story about my body as different than other people's, that I had that different experience, and people would tease. That's what you do in junior high and high school. So I felt flawed. I felt ashamed. I felt like, okay, well, there's nothing I can do about it. It's how it is. And then when I went to university, so I'm in Canada, so we do call it university, but it's college in the United States. That was at a time that the Running Room, which is a store in Canada, was kind of offering this, to this day, I think it's actually kind of great. It was the first thing I had ever seen where you could go to the store and there was running clubs, and they weren't run by professionals. It wasn't run by teachers. Nobody was grading you. Nobody was competing. And they had these programs that were like Couch to 5K, or you could decide that you were going to run a half marathon. And no one at all was like, do you have any capacities? What's your background? Let's work on your gait. It was just sort of like, you show up, you have a group of people, you do the thing, you have some camaraderie, you go away. And to this day, I think that that's actually amazing, because it was a really organic community of people that just wanted to kind of move their bodies. So I did that, but I ended up with runner's knee. And runner's knee is a condition in your knee where it really hurts, and it hurts to sit, and it hurts to stand, and it hurts to walk up and down stairs, and it hurts to do all the things. And I was like, probably 18, maybe 19 years old. So I was still a teenager. And it was painful for me to study, and it was painful for me to sit and watch a movie. And I lived in a basement of a house where I remember kind of like hanging onto the rails to get downstairs. And so I did what a lot of people do, and I sought medical solutions for this. And I remember going to a sports doctor who was like, tie a string and put rocks on the end of the string and do, quadricep lifts and like these crazy things where I'm like, okay, this is not helping my inner narrative that like my body's weird and other people don't have this problem and like something's wrong with me. And so I would kind of find a mini solution, but nothing would ever really stick. So then I would go and I would run again. And, the reality is, if this exact story happened today, the University of Calgary later established the runner's knee is actually caused by issues up in your hip. It probably could have been solved in 20 minutes with a visit to the physiotherapist. But at that moment in history, we didn't actually know that. So I went to the sports doctor. I went to physiotherapists. I went to a rolfer who was this very aggressive practitioner. And I subsequently have been to other rolfers with more gentle personalities that it's a very different experience in my body. But I remember walking out of there with like tears because it was like so dramatic in my body. And nothing ever really stuck. So I just kind of kept looking for these solutions. And this is where Pilates enters into the picture of the story. I happen to live near the only Pilates studio in Edmonton. It actually is still there. And walked in and I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on here. So if you've ever seen a Pilates reformer, there's one right behind me for those of you on YouTube, but it's a bed with ropes and it's like this medieval torture looking thing. My body immediately ate it up like it had been waiting for it my whole life. So it's a no impact solution for people that, it's a functional fitness solution. And what I would say today is you're working your stabilizer muscles and it's actually balancing your muscles through a combination of strengthening and lengthening, which nothing else that had been presented to me in the running portfolio did. And it actually got into the muscles in my hips and it built some core strength. And, I would say again, today, I didn't have that knowledge back then, but because I was not an athletic kid, running was it was too much of an aggressive situation. And if you've ever been to Edmonton, the university is right on the river valley. So not only was I running, but I was running up and down hills. And like my body just literally didn't have the glute strength or the core strength to handle that. So that's where Pilates kind of entered the picture. And I don't know why, like this is actually just one of those things that I would chalk up to actual intuition. I used to have we would call it a vision board now, but I would carry around a little book with like things that I wanted in my life and hadn't copied pictures into it, like total high school yearbook editor. And I put in that book, own a Pilates studio. And I tucked that in my pocket and I literally carried that around for 10 years and I didn't do a thing about it. So that's kind of how Pilates entered the fray. So then I went on with my life. I had a totally different career. And at that point, I lived in Toronto. I was transitioning to New York City, but the world's largest global Pilates headquarters was based in Toronto. So I'm like, oh, okay. We either have to like get this Pilates training done or move it off the list and like shred the page. And so I did it. And I didn't actually do it to change careers or to end up with my own Pilates studio. Ironically, I did it for my own body. Mm-hmm. It re-inspired that whole passion for it. It made my body feel really good. But the byproduct of taking a Pilates training is you have to teach. You cannot certify without teaching. That just doesn't exist. So I ended up starting to work with clients and quickly realized, this whole story that I had in my head about my body wasn't true. A lot of people are just like me.
Mm-hmm. And the majority, actually, the majority.
Yes. It's funny because to this day, anytime I look up any kind of study about bodies or anthropology or like anything, I'm like, oh man, I'm like the most average human that has ever been on this planet. Like I'm always like right in the middle, like even my height, my weight, everything. I'm just like average. Every experience I have, I'm just like, okay, that's what humans do. So that's kind of where the genesis of everything started. Then I added, when I moved to New York, I added a modality called Yamana body rolling that essentially opened up my joints, because when I did Pilates, what I noticed, I mean, this was a while ago, so I trained with dancers who had just ranges of motion I didn't. So again, cue up the something's wrong with my body. Everybody's having an experience that's different than mine. So thankfully, because that script was still active, I added Yamana body rolling, which has become a huge part of my life and my practice and my clients and students' lives as well. So it opens up and decompresses the joints. It has a side benefit of doing the same thing with the muscles. So you get length, you get strength, you get all kinds of things with that. I combined those. I ended up, now we're going to go and fast forward. Moved to Calgary, opened up my own studio, switched careers, started working with people, because as I went through this path of self-discovery, I'm not alone. And because my body is a little bit, I call it like almost dyslexic, where like, yeah, if you throw a ball, I have a hard time coordinating my brain and that information. By the time I can break down an exercise, I can teach it to the vast majority of people in a way that makes sense to them. And then there was just something else that was missing, and I didn't know what it was. So that's kind of why we're here on this podcast right now. So, I'm doing all the things and all the stuff, and there's just this like restlessness and this anxiety and this edginess that also combined really heavily with like burnout. So I would, push, which in our culture is like, I'm an amazing person, I can like be
Look
like,
at how productive I am.
Right,
Yes.
totally,
Yeah.
totally, right. And everything around me is like, yeah, that's so great, and I would still to this day, I'm not going to pretend I'm over this, but like kind of jump from thing to thing. But I was like, there was something. So I would kind of add different trainings. I'm like, I'm searching. And I ended up calling you. I actually found you on Google. I don't even know what happened one day, but I'm like, this thing called Yin. I'm like, what is that? I Google it. I'm like, oh my God, this is totally what I need. And I don't know what I actually thought I was going to get out of that, but it was for me. And it was because I felt this wired but tired thing. I was literally exhausted. But the second I would lay down, I'm like, ding, I got to check my emails. I've got to post on social media. I've got to take a training. I've got to do this. I've got to do that. And it was, like my whole worth was in my productivity. And of course, my body was paying the price for that. And so enter you and privates. And that was kind of my Yin origin story. I wasn't even looking for yoga. I was just like, I just don't even know what to do with all the sensation that's in my body. And even though I'm teaching other people how to get and stay out of pain, I wouldn't describe what was happening in my body as pain, but it was like I said, it's just this wired, anxious kind of energy combined with when you do decompress and take downtime. Oh God, I gotta stand up and do something.
Almost like a sense of unease.
Yeah.
Like where you're just kind of like, I know that I experienced that if I've had when I have bouts of anxiety, where it's just like that feeling of like, I need to do something, something's not right, but what do I do? And I don't know what to do. And yet I can't do anything. And yes, I should do the thing. And yeah, it's just this sort of, I don't know. I always just think of it as like a feeling of being not at home or unease in settling down in your body. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I kind of, I guess before I found you, I had done some extensive hot yoga, which at first really, really met what my brain wanted, which was like, we can do the yoga. It's hard. And then I really got injured. And then that's when the amplification of I can't sit still, but I can't move either came in, because the injury was actually at my SI joint. So my back hurt. And it was painful to walk up and down the street. And a lot of my Pilates movements were painful, like coming into flexion. And so it was like my body just shut down. It's like, hey, friend, we're not doing this anymore. But I didn't have replacement pieces either mentally or physically. And so I was just like, okay, we're gonna do the yin, whatever that is. Let's do the yin. Oh, here's somebody who teaches privates. Great, let's do this.
Okay. And I remember I don't even remember how many we did, but quite a few privates.
It was over
several months.
Yeah.
And I remember when you came in and we were doing the privates, I could witness, as we do as teachers, that sort of what I'm going to call now dysregulatedness. Yeah. Where you were just, you were making the shape with your body and you were using the props and all of that was good. But there was this sense of, excuse me. There was this sort of sense of you being really uncomfortable with the stillness, with any of it. And at the time when you and I were working together, I didn't have trauma training yet. I was not a yoga therapist yet, but so I wasn't sure what was happening. I was just like, is she just super A-type? And like, she's got to go somewhere and got things to do. Is this pose too much for her? Should I give her another prop? But that doesn't seem to be what it is. And luckily, because I'm very curious and I don't expect to have all the answers ever to anything, I was able to just kind of sit with you and, move props around and see what you needed and just kind of let that be how you were in those shapes without feeling like I was like, I need to give her a word or a quote or a smoothie, or like, I didn't need to like fix the fact that you were uncomfortable.
Yes. My recollection is we would throw a bunch of props at it. We would kind of have some laughs about, like, in particular, I had like actual anxiety about parting from my phone. And it was literally, you're like, let's put the phone here where you can see it still. and then you don't need to worry about it. But it was the idea, because we actually did like 90-minute sessions. And so it was the idea of something's going to happen that I'm totally out of control with. And then I'm going to have to deal with all this stuff. That's what I told myself. But it was really, it was actually we're going to be quiet now for like 90 minutes. There's going to be some light conversation perhaps, but we're going to just like sit in your own body. And so I made it about the phone. It wasn't really about the phone. Because the phone would give me, well, here's the list of things, and I have to reply to this person. And I mean, one thing I will say is, to this day, like it's not even true, but I think I have like a really bad memory. So when stuff would come up in my head, I would be like, we got to write that down now. If I don't write it down now, it's gone forever. So there was a bunch of things happening there, but they really were about, despite the fact that I had hundreds of hours of training, that I had a studio, that I worked with clients, that I could create these great solutions, both in their bodies and my own. When the body comes to stillness, then what do we do? And what are those sensations? And how do we feel? And how do we just sit and be in that? And even talking about this, I'm like, oh God. Because I just remember what that feels like. It's like a balloon that's too big sitting in my body, and I'm like, I just need to like move around and make some space for that or something.
It's a good visual. And so at the time, of course, I didn't know what that was about. I mean, it could have just been A-typeness, and like you said, our culture certainly praises and appreciates working yourself to the bone and always being busy and always being productive. And so it's sometimes, I think it's so hard to see that actually we're doing that to avoid being still, being quiet, dropping inward, checking out our inner landscape, getting in touch with our emotions or whatever else is lurking in that balloon. you know? And so sometimes I feel like, I do think that to me, that is probably the hardest part of a yin practice for most people is it's not the sensation in their hamstring. It's the, wait, I'm just going to be here and be still. And like, you're not going to talk to me incessantly the whole time. Like, what, you know,
Yeah.
what is that? Yeah. So
Yeah,
what
it's
was,
actually funny because when I think back to those times in your townhouse with the private yoga sessions, not one of those memories relates at all to any of the poses or postures. Now, to be fair, like I've subsequently done yin training and I do yin every day. So those would be perhaps a little bit overridden at this point. But I have really strong body sensations of almost that anxiety of detaching from my phone. And yet I continue to show up every single week. So it wasn't an unpleasant thing for me to have it. It just was like, when I think back and remember, it's a strong body memory of like, oh, we've got some anxiety in there.
do you think that maybe because a lot of people wouldn't keep coming back, like they would experience that uncomfortableness and be like, well, yin is not for me. I need to go do this vinyasa practice where I can like go, do. But there must have been some part of you, the wiser self of Janis, that was like, this is good for you. Like this is where you need to be, or this is what is going to help. Otherwise, I think you wouldn't have come back, right? If it would have, you know, if you didn't experience some sort of a physical, mental, emotional, nervous system, whatever benefit from it, or there wasn't that part of you, that bigger, wiser part of yourself that was like, yeah, this was really hard. And, and we need to do it again. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah. And actually what is coming up, I'm like, you're going to love hearing this. And so are other teachers actually, but I think you were a huge reason that I came back. So although you and I are very different people, you're very regulated. And I think I relate to that sense of commonality where like, I mean, your hair is purple. You were obviously not like the popular kid in high school that was like, you know, all of that stuff. And so I think there are a lot of yoga classes that are taught by people that would have really brought up that insecurity in me, where I'm just reliving that narrative of my body's not like yours. And you never had the striving element, like one day you'll be able to twist further, because we don't do that in yin. But I think that you really were a huge piece of why I came back, because I never would have used that language back then, but I'm just like, I could feel that sense of regulation. I could also relate to your relationship to your own body. And again, I probably wouldn't have been able to identify that back then, but it didn't trigger for me what I felt in hot yoga, which is that I have to do more. And I probably, and it's even better if I do more while I'm skinnier and I need to sweat off the pounds and what, you know, all of these kind of cues that are put into those classes. None of it was there. So we could actually just settle into like, do the thing. And I think probably it became less uncomfortable as I continued to do it as well. So it was really that safety net of like, you were there, you weren't freaking out, you weren't telling me to do more, you weren't pushing. And it was just a thing where I could be like, okay, this feels like a little different. Let's check this out. And it's safe and she's safe and we're cool. And you were doing your classes with me in your home as well. So I wasn't in a studio environment. I didn't feel like a failed professional. That helped too, because I was like not around other people. Nobody could see what was actually happening. And we either could talk about things or not talk about things, and it was all good. And so just, you know, I can't even understate that enough. I listened to your podcast, and when we just talk about like, leave space for the student, do your own practice so you're regulated. Like for me, those things are things I can strongly identify why I kept coming back. But at the time, like that was invisible to me. But had you just talked to me and told me all about my anatomy and told me all about this pose has this benefit and this does this to that meridian, I would have been out of there.
Well, it wouldn't have been what you needed. in the bigger picture of things, right? Like the last thing you needed was more stuff coming
Yeah.
at you. Yeah. For those who are listening, the setup I used to have in Calgary was we had a townhouse where I had a little, it was very small, but it was like a yoga room. And that's where I would practice. And that's also where I would see clients. So it was like pretty empty, really. It was just like a room with some stuff on the walls and some mats and some props. And that's
You had
the
some books in
space.
there too. I was
Yes,
like, she knows
yoga books. Yes,
she
yes.
knows what's going on.
Yeah, my yoga books. But yeah, that room was just designed for practice. And that was really important to me when we did move into that place, that like the only reason I was going to move is if I was going to get a room where this could be where I could have my yoga business, privates, I could film things, needed to have like my own little office space there. So as we started practicing together within those sessions, there was a bit of a shift I noticed in the beginning from like, what do you mean you're going to put my phone over there? To, and of course it was a little different each day because that's the way we roll as humans. But there did seem to be a shift in you. And I wouldn't say like a complete stillness, but there was more of a settling. There was definitely more of a settling and a more of a comfort level. And I was at the time wasn't sure, like, is it in your own body more comfortable? You're just more comfortable here with me because you know me, you know the space. When did you decide? So we've been doing that. When did you decide? Now I think I want to become a yin yoga teacher as well. Talk to me about that sort of transition, because it was after I moved, right? Yeah, I think so. Just after. Or was it just before?
It was a fairly tight timeline actually in there. You're right. It was after you moved because I was no longer your private student, but I quickly became Paul's student. And then we attended, you were doing your advanced level and I was doing my intro level with Paul. What I can tell you is the sensation that the words that I always use to describe what I would be without Yin is a cat on the ceiling. So if you think about like literal Garfield, what I noticed was that my responses and my reactions to things would be just a little bit toned down. So instead of being like, whoa, or waking up in the morning and one thing happening and me just being up there and hanging out there all day. And what would happen before was I would use the word trigger now. I certainly didn't in the past, but we can go about our day and like one thing goes a little bit sideways and get triggered. And I would spend the whole day just like spinning up there. So I knew that I think I actually did exactly the same thing with yoga that I did with Pilates. I did it for myself. I'm like, okay, I really want to go into this work and I want to do it in a bigger way and have that experience in my body. And the way Paul used to run his trainings was that they were on the land of the medicine Buddha. You would go for 100 hours, which is a substantial period. You don't have a phone. The land of the medicine Buddha is an active Buddhist
retreat center,
community / retreat center. There was one tiny little corner of the kitchen area where you could access the Wi-Fi and your phone, but the rest of it, you had to connect with others and you really had to connect with yourself. And we would open every morning with yoga, meditation. We would have lunch. There was like a little bit of a personal break. We would have more classes. We would then eat dinner and you kind of repeat. And so it was really transformative in the sense that you have nowhere to go. You're in that space with yourself, your body. There's a couple other people kicking around who you can connect with, but it's not like you can't distract yourself with your phone and your business and your stuff that's happening.
And you don't even have to cook or clean your room or do your laundry. It's like literally anything you could kind of busy yourself with, other than maybe going for a walk in the woods or going swimming or, like all of the things that you could busy yourself with are not there.
They're gone. Yeah, totally. There's like a tiny little gift shop. There are a couple bikes kicking around. You can go into a small town, but it's, you know, there's nothing to do there. So it's a huge experience in terms of you're really in that yin experience. So although I knew it was a teacher training, certainly I think the drive was myself and my personal journey and my personal experience of it. And, you know, I showed up and did the whole 200 hours. So I did it again the year after, because I could feel in my body that there was a shift, there was a change. I was able to regulate my emotions more. I was able to actually not be, that balloon inside me wasn't as big. I was able to perspectivize things differently in terms of every little tiny thing wasn't like I had to deconstruct it with 4 friends for 6 hours, you know. And that stuff had, you know, that hijacks your life in actual fact, because when you're an adult and you have the house and the car and the business and the child and the, you know, all the stuff, there's lots of things coming at you every day. And if tiny little things throw you off, and when I say you, I mean me, where I just, my emotional, I didn't have a possibility of processing my emotions around it. So I'd have to call a friend, or I would ruminate on it, or I would just be in this heightened state of like anxiety. And that anxious energy would be really productive, but it didn't actually benefit me when you start layering thing over thing after thing after thing on top. So it was really, initially, it was like, yes, it was in the format of a teacher training, which was familiar to me. But in Paul's teacher trainings, there's certainly information, but it is about your practice. So, you know, every single day there was hours of yin practice. And when I think back to that time, I'm like, that was 100% the best part of that experience at Land of Medicine Buddha, because you're just, you know, I can feel myself like laying in that sunny room. It's nice and warm there.
I know.
I can smell the redwoods. And it's just, you're literally laying with yourself, being with yourself in this peaceful state, which for me was something that was outside of practicing with you. That was new. So, I mean, I moved mountains to make that happen, because at that time, I mean, I still have a child, but I had quite a small child, and it was not super easy to coordinate 2 years in a row, going away for 100 hours, flying to California and being like, bye, can't even really FaceTime you. So, but I really made that happen in my life, because it was actually a moment for me to be like, I can feel my body in a neutral place, as opposed to all of this circus going on.
And then I know, just because of our interactions while we were there, that there was some point, and I don't know if it was during that training or before that training, that you started to realize that either part or maybe all of this balloon had the word trauma attached to it. It wasn't just, I need to be busy, I need to like, there was a root to that phonetic state of dysregulation.
Yeah, for sure.
Do you want to talk a bit briefly about what happened with that?
Yeah. So in my own personal life, there was, you know, we've talked a lot about that already. In the meantime, I'm working with studio clients for myself. I hadn't yet folded yin into the family, but the way that my studio is set up is a lot like how your house was, where when you come in the door, it's you and me in the space. I'm not in a clinic. I'm not part of any other kind of business. So when somebody's in my space with me, it's just them and I, and you end up chatting and you end up talking. And what I noticed was other people were having some very, you know, this loops us back to the beginning. Other people are just like me, where when we started specifically the release work or the stillness work and stuff that's not Pilates. So I'm specifically referring right now to like a yamana body rolling. We open the body. We do what is like, I actively refer to that as body work. So you're doing body work.
Totally.
And then they're here with me. And out and up would come stories of people's trauma histories. Some of them recent, some of them not recent, some of them midpoint in their life. And I think it was that, just like you, I'm a very curious person. So like, okay, what is going on here? Like, we're releasing the body, and out are coming all these words about things that happened. And what do I say? And so I had also started at that time a search for, okay, part of what I have done in my professional life is when I see something pop up that I don't know what to do with, I look for training. Like, okay, who knows how to handle this? And we're not talking about a long time ago, but it was hard to find and it was hard to pin, like, where do I go with this? And at some point I did realize it was called trauma. That was the word that we use. And then it was like, okay, where do I find training that actually handles that? And that's actually, yoga comes to the top of that bubble quite often. I'm not sure that a lot of yoga actually does a great job of managing trauma, honestly.
I would agree. Not of what's represented right now in the what I call the Western yoga verse.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So in my own body, I've done subsequent trainings and subsequent certifications, but the only place I could find it, now this is going to be a little bit of a hot take, but the only place I could find trauma work was actually in my own yin practice. That was it for me. So I think, again, I probably wouldn't have said that at the time, but there was a huge driver of, I'm going to go into the mountains in California at this, Buddhist retreat center, and I'm going to have this space to sit in my body and do some of that trauma work. Now that's all within the context of, I already was a body worker / body professional, which means, really what that means is that I'm having the same experience as everybody else, but I don't have an 8-hour day desk job where I'm focusing on other things. I'm focusing on the body and on the brain and on the, all day long. So it was like, but that really is, my trauma healing pathway. Actually, the doorway was yin, and the daily practice that I engage in continues to be yin. And so we don't define yin as a trauma practice, but in my body and my experience, it is.
I want to tease that out a little bit more. I know when we were at LMB, which is what we call it for shorthand, for those of you listening, Land of the Medicine Buddha. I know you did talk to me at a point when we were walking in the woods about like all of this like stuff is coming up and I don't know what to do. And, and I think I said, well, have you talked to Paul? And you did, but I don't think you got the answer you wanted.
I did not. I indeed did not. That was a source of frustration, which probably wasn't even, I kind of directed it a bit at him, I think. And it probably wasn't.
Which makes sense.
It wasn't a him thing. It was like, I want an answer, and they didn't really get an answer.
Because, you're like, I need a solution.
Yeah.
You did not give me one.
Yes.
What the hell?
Yes, correct.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I mean, Paul was working within his scope of practice and knowledge.
100%.
I mean, if we look at it from the outside now, those of you who are not on YouTube can't see Janis, but, a young, attractive, blonde student comes to you and says, can I talk to you for a little while about some things about practice? And then says, stuff's coming up for me and I don't know what to do with it. And he's a male teacher. I mean, do you know what I mean? Like he's in a situation where it's like, okay, they're really, I think he handled it as skillfully. And I don't know, you were probably not the first person that has come to him because the nature of our traumatized culture of working with many, many women over the years. And like you said, being at Land of the Medicine Buddha, which just the land there is powerful. And then removing all the distractions. I mean, I'm sure he's had many students come to him and be like, something's up here. But he's very clear on his scope of practice and what his expertise is and what he can't help people with,
Yeah.
He's
Well,
not a
and that,
therapist, and he's not even a yoga therapist. And
correct.
so, it would be, although I know you wanted some sort of a like, here, do this mantra or like something, it's like, it would have been irresponsible for him to do that. And then when you look at that dynamic, that's how we have all of these people in our yoga culture, all of these men that have fallen from grace, when they have the arrogance to think that they are a guru and that they can fix things and that they can solve everything. And you have people that are searching and wounded coming to them, and they take advantage of that. So like, I think he handled it as skillfully really as he could in the circumstances. But I do remember you being like super frustrated by like,
this is true.
No magic pill. What is happening here?
I think as well, like what I wanted is something that Paul would never do. And that's very much to his credit, which is like, okay, so what was happening for me was, you go into this environment, everything's turned off, you're doing an ungodly amount of yin. Like you would never recommend that another person do that much yin in a day. I've never taught that much in a student to a day. And this is across the board for all kinds of teacher trainings. This happens in Yamana body rolling. It happens
different
in Pilates.
Experiences for sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
You just go nuts with the amount of material you're doing. And to be fair, now that we actually do teacher trainings on Zoom, they tend to be shortened up. But
which is good.
In the olden days, when you would go in for these intensives, it is like the word intense doesn't.
There's a reason why they're called intensives.
Yeah, exactly. So where my brain kind of goes when I start to feel like, okay, that my inner tube is too big for my frame, I go into my intellect. That helps. That helps me. So I'm like, okay, I want the scientific answer for why I feel, again, I wouldn't have ever used the word triggered, but I'm like, there's things coming up for me that are definitely PTSD. And I'm actually watching other people at this training have the same experience. And what I thought I was asking him was like, explain to me the exact scientific, thing that's happening. And Paul is not the guy who's going to be like, the issues are in the tissues. Like, no, he's not that person. And so, I would credit him with just kind of like not giving me garbage answers, because he's not that guy. But at the end of it, what happens when we take a body that has complex trauma, that has, a history of sexual assault and of relational trauma from my childhood, when I lay in stillness, and I do this repetitively, my body feels like, like my inside is too big for my outside. And so, we in our classes, we're talking about meridians, and we were talking about fascia. And in my head, I'm like, he's going to tell me why my inside expands when I lay in a posture. And he wasn't going to do that. And then I was like, okay, this is, I'm really frustrated because I just want the answer. And the answer actually was, I need relationship. I need choices. I need practices. And I actually went home, and I remember Paul laughed at this. Actually, I went home and I'm like, okay, I'm going to actually do 14 minutes of yin per day. That's it. Because that's what I could actually handle before stuff started to like come up. So when I'm alone in my living room, I can do a lot more than that now. But at that time, that was the number. So when I came to see you, I could do 90 minutes because you're there.
We were co-regulating.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's actually what I did. For actually many years after I did my teacher training, I would just do my own like little 14-minute practice. And then actually that didn't really change until the pandemic. So like I did that for literally years. So I always did yin, but it never looked like what a quote unquote yin practice would look like inside,
right?
But it's because that's what my body, I could, again, wouldn't use this word, but that was the right dose for me. So that the word dose comes out of, I now have the trauma sensitive yoga training. And
We're
I
going to get into
know,
that coming up.
yeah, that what I did and what my intuitive sense was apply the right dose. That's what it was for me. It was like, I can do this. I can sit in stillness. I can give my body that blueprint of what it feels like, but I can't do more than that, because if I start to do more than that, I'm all
It's too much.
dysregulated.
You know, it's interesting that I used to have a friend who had complex PTSD in a few different ways. Some of them being abuse, and then also like an extreme car accident. And, you know, I remember when I was just starting to get to know her, again, all before my trauma training. So there was obviously little signs that the universe has been giving me, you know, the whole time about yoga therapy. But when we started establishing a friendship, she told me, I just want to give you a heads up. Like I have PTSD, and sometimes when I'm just out and around, I'm going to have a flashback. And I was like, okay, so what do you need me to do then? Like when this is happening, like what is there something I can say? Like, you know, what would I do then? You know, not to like fix it or take it away, because obviously I can't. I mean, she has complex trauma. I can't fix that. I don't have a magic wand to heal the trauma of the world, or it would be done already. And so I just said, you know, what do you need from me? And she said, well, because I thought, you know, should I put my hand on you? Should I not? You know, like I just was like, I got nothing, you know. And she said, well, because it's you, and you know, I know you and trust you. She's like, actually, if you did just put your hand on my shoulder or on my hand and just for like and said my name, that would help to kind of bring me back, and then I would be able to kind of regulate and co-regulate. And I was like, okay, all right,
Done.
let's do that then. It actually never happened while we were out and about, but it was helpful for me to know that. And then the other thing that because I'm super nerdy, so if anyone will share their inner journey with me, I'm all curious about it. I think humans are fascinating. And so she would tell me that one of the things that they were doing, which I now know is called titration, in her therapy, was that with the car accident, was that her therapist would have her first drive to that neighborhood where it happened and then go home. And then they would work through that. And then several weeks later, it would be, you know, drive a couple streets away from it and then go back home. And then eventually it got to the point where, you know, go to the street, maybe on foot, maybe not in a car, in case you have a flashback, and then go home. And then eventually it led to, now you're going to go drive down that street. But this was a very slow, gradual, titrated process where at any point she could go, nope, we're going back to what I did last week if it was too much, as a way to heal essentially the trauma around that specific trigger, so that she would be able to drive down that road. Now, this is a gross oversimplification because I'm talking about a car accident. It's not so easy when it's things like sexual abuse. But I just remember thinking, knowing that knowledge, and then when you shared with me, you know, kind of that yin was actually for you a good tool for this, it was like, right, it makes sense, because you decide how much you come in, and then you got to kind of be with it, but then you can always backtrack.
Yep.
And you could always come out. And you could say that about any style of yoga, if the teacher's open to people doing their own thing, that's a rant for a whole other time. But
Yep.
but in other styles of yoga, because you're moving so much and you're so distracted by like, put your right foot here, put your left foot here, do that, you're not dropping in to your body in the same way that you would in a yin practice. And so it's less likely to kind of, I think, to bring that up for you to then work with, because you're much more able to distract yourself with the busying of the yoga, which is why I think in a lot of styles, that's why people think yoga is so easy, because they do a lot of movement and then they do shavasana and they're like, shit, this is so fucking hard. And it's like, well, yeah, it's the first time you've been still in the whole class.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the other styles of yoga that I have tried, and I've done more than just hot yoga, it actually just fires up that whole narrative that I said at the beginning. So the way, one of my coping strategies in the world is when I do feel like I'm not good enough and something's wrong with me and everybody else knows this except me in this room, I'm like, I get really competitive. Like, I'm going to show you, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to achieve this. And honestly, I don't think any teacher would notice that that whole thing is going on. And in fact, if anything, I just look like this model yoga student because I'm pushing harder and I'm, you know, I'm getting deeper into the posture.
Practice, all is coming.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
So I think yin isn't that. I think there's a lot of things that actually really worked about the style for me. One is that it's really about what you're feeling, not about the shape. There's no mirrors in the room. The teacher typically is not walking around unless requested to do so. There is either minimal or no music to kind of distract you. There is minimal or no instruction to distract you or to correct you. And that actually, I will specifically identify that, you know, I grew up in an environment that was more focused on more of a critical component. And so criticism for me can be quite triggering. And then that whole piece fires up again. So even a simple quote unquote, we call them correction, you know, turn the hand towards the ceiling. That can actually fire things up for me.
It can start that like, I'm not right. I'm not good enough. I know I'm not a jock. I've always been this way. That whole loop. Yeah. Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And then my body just doesn't feel safe. I'm not grounded in anything. And so while we're calling it yoga and it's like mind body connection, I'm like over somewhere else, like, you know, competing and achieving and feeling inadequate and all the things. So I think that, you know, also the timer component is actually genius because there's an end point to it.
Yes.
So we're in it. Well, we're not in it forever. We are, there's an announced time to come out, but then we also have an invitation to come out at any other point. So I don't always stay in them for the intended time. I have students that don't stay in things for the intended time. And no, you're not in trouble. No one looks at you. No one says anything.
You're not
yogaing
like, wrong.
Do you need help? You know?
Yeah.
And like, they're not trying to rescue out of it. And so for me, it actually was also one of the first times that I had permission to make choices where I could just be like, okay, I'm not going to do this right now, or I don't like this, or
agency. Yeah.
I'm uncomfortable or whatever is happening where, you know, no one cared. Like if I had laid in Paul's classes in Shavasana the entire time, he wouldn't have cared.
No, totally not. He's so nonplussed about things like that.
And it's genuinely not caring. It's not it's okay if you do this, or you can make your own modifications, because that's actually coercive as well, or
and
making you feel less than.
And it's not, I want to just pick apart the word not caring, just so people don't misunderstand what you're saying. It's not that like Paul doesn't care about people and the students.
Yes.
He's just so unattached to what your practice looks like that he trusts that you are the expert with your body and that you should do what you need to do.
Yes, he facilitates an experience, but doesn't have certain ways that in order to please him that you have to do certain things, or that you're doing it quote unquote right. So, I mean, I was also lucky in the sense that you had trained with Paul and you were my first yin experience. And then I trained with Paul and he was my other yin experience. And so I didn't have anybody in the middle or anywhere else where it was like, I was having a different experience than
the message was consistent. Yes. Yeah. So when you were at LMB the first time and you didn't get the answer you wanted, but you kept practicing anyways, and then you went home, what did you decide to now do with this little egg that you had discovered? Were you like, okay, I know you were doing your yin practices, but were you like, okay, maybe I need to get some support, therapy, a group, something? Okay.
Yeah. What I would say is it unearthed.
That's the best word. I use that word all the time. Unearthed. It's just like so accurate. Yeah.
So it unearthed conscious memories of experiences where I was like, I think I need some trauma therapy. Like, you know, subsequently in a book written by Bessel van der Kolk, that's not the popular one, I learned, surprise, I'm a very average human. So there's, you know, when they take a study, the largest cohort of trauma individuals known I don't know, we might have it post-COVID, but prior to that, it was the World War II veterans. And on average, it took people, those men, 20 years to actually address their trauma. And guess what? I was pretty much sitting right on it. And it was, I think, a combination of, you know, in that book, they also talk about like why. And it's part of what they think is that the load of your life actually becomes too big to kind of suppress it. And so that's kind of what happened. And then I had this experience that it was unearthing for me, and it wasn't comfortable, but I was like, so I'm not a person who actually typically gets flashbacks, but what it did do is I was like, oh my God, there was this thing that happened. And I completely, like, I would use the terminology, I forgot about it, but I didn't. I actually formed my entire life around repressing it. And then there it came. There's the beach ball up at the top. And that had been actually exposed by Yin. Now, that's where we loop back to Paul, where like he did the right thing, where he wasn't like, I can help you with that. Or, you know, here's the 3 easy tips to like,
here's a magic mantra for that. Yeah, exactly.
Right. And actually he was quite clear, like, this is not a yoga thing. Like it's not. So, you know, I came home and I did start a pathway down some trauma therapy for myself that turned into, you know, further exploration. I subsequently trained with Gabor Mate. I subsequently trained with the trauma center. And that allowed me to really,
I was gonna say, let's go into that. So you did your one level with Paul, then you came back the next year. Right. So clearly he had not scared you off.
He did not. No.
No. And then, now though you're getting some support and you're like having an understanding of what's happening, which must have made it at least mentally easier to deal with. Like to go, okay, absolutely. I know what this is now, at least. It's not emotionally or nervous system wise easier, but at least your mind has an understanding of like, oh, here's what's happening.
Yes. I'm not looking now for like that simple, like, give me the physiological thing that's happening in my body. Like, you know, it's just like, we can accept the thing comes up sometimes. And then the key is to re-regulate myself, which at that point was still a little rocky.
You're having this journey of you're sitting with your clients who are going through trauma, sharing these things. You're experiencing it yourself. And so at some point, knowing you the way I know you, you were like, I need some further education and training in this. Now I will get on the Google and I will do some research and I will find something. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And then exactly. I used Google. I asked therapists. I looked around, and, you know, it's like funny because there's these things that pop up in the world where it's like, wow, you know, 5 years makes a huge difference in the availability or the accessibility, or like who has the answer for this. So, I actually, I had discovered the work of Gabor Mate. He had several books out, and he happened to be coming to Red Deer because he lives in Vancouver, and, you know, he would speak some places. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to drive to Red Deer. And
Red Deer, of all the places though, hey?
I know,
like,
right?
It's not Calgary, not Edmonton. For those of you who don't know Alberta, sorry, won't give you the geography lesson, but Red Deer is a smaller city than Calgary and Edmonton, and it's right in between. So it's like it's a random feeling choice, but
it's a very random feeling choice. Yes. So I'm like, okay, we'll go see Gabor in Red Deer. So I was blown away by his presentation. And again, no idea like this wasn't some sort of like, let's do professional training and education.
No,
but it was for myself. And at the end, because I had already been on a mission to be like, okay, how do I weave trauma work into what I'm doing? And it, you know, it's for myself, but it literally is also because I think it's extremely irresponsible when clients are sharing sexual assaults and car accidents and, you know,
all the things
to either ignore it or to say the wrong thing. That actually that's a very bad thing
to try to fix it, which is what a lot of yoga teachers do because they're big-hearted people. They just want to like make it go away, make it fix it, make it better. And that's Yeah. That's not skillful either.
Or have a conversation like a friend would, or give my opinion.
Right.
Like
Yes.
there's lists of things where I was like, oh, okay. So I spoke to Gabor after his presentation, and I asked him if he knew anybody who was, you know, I explained I'm a body person. I want to add this emotional piece, but like, who is the person to teach that? And at that time, he didn't actually have a professional training. So he was like, well, you can come and study with me in Mexico. But it was like, it wasn't like it wasn't a formalized program at that point.
Right.
And again, as I already mentioned, you know, I parented a child, and I was like, oh, it's a little bit not exactly the right thing at the right time to like try to figure out what to do with my kid and close my business and like do that. And then I also, in the Google searching, discovered the Trauma Center, which is Bessel van der Kolk's kind of hub. And then underneath that, there's a guy named David Emerson who worked quite closely with Bessel, and they developed a yoga application. So it's a clinical adjunct that's trauma. That's where anybody who has been exposed to the word trauma sensitive, that's their piece of the world. But it's a clinical adjunct that uses yoga as a treatment modality for trauma. And this was in Boston. And again, it was kind of like, ooh, I don't know how I'm going to kind of make this all work. And then the pandemic happened. And the pandemic was no gift to anything.
The big ugly happened. Yes.
Yes. It was no gift at all, except all of a sudden these trainings went online. And I was like, whoosh, in there like a dirty shirt, signing up. And then I think what it really offered as well was, you know, I hesitate to even say this, but it offered a time where there wasn't actually a ton of outside distraction. So I could really do my own trauma work in a way that wasn't like, oh, hey, I'm going to take an hour from my day and pop up to trauma therapy and then pop down to my work and then continue parenting and business owning and doing the things. It was like, it was actually one of the most intense experiences of
the
my
world
life.
is shut down. I have no other things to busy myself with other than raising my small person, taking care of myself, and doing this training.
Yeah. Yes. And so I did them back to back in the larger pandemic window. And it, you know, at times in that I felt like I was going to have a breakdown, just because it's like, it was like my Yin experience where, because it's a professional training, it's dosed out so much more intensely than you would ever typically get. But that was really the first time there's languaging that I've used in this podcast where all of those things are kind of inherently popping up, but I had no language. I had no practice. I didn't have kind of the clinical background and the information. You know, for example, I knew that in my work, like I do a lot of system and systemic body work, but just not understanding, you know, the Trauma Center just has brilliant work about system wide, you know, the systems that we live in and the intersectional experiences that we have. And it really put language and learning and actual academic components to practice. There is a yoga practice that comes out of the Trauma Center. And the interesting thing is I continue, despite that practice being fully available to me any day or moment that I choose, I continue for my own trauma work and my own trauma journey to do yin in my own body every single day. And I now do significantly more than 14 minutes, but it continues to be a space where I can settle into all of the pieces that I need for trauma work in my body, where I have the stillness, I have the nervous system regulation. And I pull pieces of the Trauma Center's work into it. Absolutely. I think you can't take that material without it fundamentally changing you or your practice or your teaching. But we have this strong conversation that yin is not trauma.
I was
work.
just going to touch on that. Is that we often hear, and some of you and some people that are listening may not have heard this before if they've never kind of dipped their toe in the trauma sensitive realm, but we often get this message in therapeutic circles that like yin yoga, and for that matter, restorative and yoga nidra, anything where you're kind of being still and quiet and hanging out for some time, are not typically considered trauma sensitive forms of yoga. And yet, just
Yeah.
like with everything, we cannot make these blanket statements. This isn't for that. This is bad for this. Because as we often hear in yin, the answer is yes, no, and it depends. Because you're a perfect living example of how what we have been maybe taught or heard about what is considered okay practice for somebody to do who's working with their trauma, yin wouldn't be the one that most experts would recommend, and yet you have found it transformative. And so
Absolutely transformative. Yes.
yeah, which is, I just wanted to really kind of like highlight, spotlight, underline, stars around that, because
yes.
would I, if a student reached out to me and wanted to work with me privately and told me, you know, pretty quickly that they were dealing with some trauma, would yin be the first recommendation for them? No. But would I include it and see? Yes. And in fact, I do teach a class for the provincial mental health has a program here, and I teach a class for them, and it's a very mixed group, and which is one of the reasons why originally when they reached out to me I said no almost twice to doing this class, and they just kept reaching out, and finally I was like, okay, universe, why do you keep dropping this class in my lap? But one of the things that is tricky about it is that it's a mental health program and it's the gamut. So it's not just these people are dealing with schizophrenia, or these people are dealing with bipolar, or these people are dealing with complex trauma, or this person has generalized anxiety disorder. It's all of them together. Now they are all in treatment. They're medicated where appropriate. There's a coach there that works with the program, so that, you know, so it's not just like me on my own there. But one of the things that I was always told is that yoga nidra isn't a great practice for those kinds of populations. And yet I finished my class a little early one day and was like, oh, shoot. Okay. Well, you know, let's just do the body scan part of yoga nidra. We won't do like a big, long, drawn out practice where there's lots of silence and lots of imagery, but we'll let's just do the body scan. And universally, every single one of them came up to me afterwards and said, we love that. Can we do that again next week? And so yoga nidra became part of that therapeutic class with people who are dealing with all kinds of different mental health situations. And I also include yin in there. But what I do is I titrate it very slowly. So week 1, we might do just at the end before yoga nidra, we might do like one yin pose, and we maybe hold it for a couple minutes. And I tell them about how yin's different and what, you know, what this might feel like mentally, blah, blah, blah. And then the next week we might, you know, do 2 poses for 2 minutes. And then the next week we might be 2 poses for 3 minutes each. And I've noticed, because of the way that I'm approaching these quiet practices, first of all, they have moved. It's gentle movement. Like we just do things like wrist circles and like side bends. Like it's not, you know, a little bit of core stability, but like it's very like gentle, accessible movement. And because the class, we actually start still, grounding, centering, then do some gentle movement, then slowly trickle it down into stillness again, that group, that population responds incredibly well to that class. So the reason I'm highlighting that and your story about how yin has been this tool is that I think we have to watch sometimes as yoga teachers that we don't sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater.
For sure.
You know, that like, yes, these might be general guidelines, general rules, but there are always going to be exceptions, and it's how you do it. And then also being open and receptive to the individual or individuals you're working with, right? That like, there is no, anyone who's studied with Paul would know that there's like no one size fits all in
100%.
in the poses. So there's also no one size fits all in the nervous system, in the mind, in all of these things need to be approached in a way that's like individualized, you know, customized.
So I think that my experience, and this is really as a teacher, but when people come into my studio, and I think that this would be a broad application of many teachers and many students, most people aren't coming to yoga because they're like, I have trauma and I want the yoga to heal me.
Totally.
And if you are in that category, you for sure 100% would be with the trauma center's trauma sensitive yoga program. But the vast majority of my clients, I would say that at any given time, between 50 and 90% of my students, my client base, have trauma histories. Are they coming here even with that knowledge? Most of the time, no. Mm-hmm. And I highlight that because I was also that person. So mm-hmm. I knew mm-hmm. that I had a drive to do these things, to move my body, to try to get rid of pain, to get out of, to make myself more comfortable, to be like less, itchy and anxious,
fidgety and yes, all the things.
And yeah, all the things. But would I have ever gone to any practitioner and been like, I have complex trauma history and I want to use movement as an adjunct therapy? Hell no, because I didn't even know. And so when we're actually talking about, can Yin offer assistance on a trauma journey? Yes. So for one thing, it unearthed my trauma. So I'm going to say that actually had like a ton of value. Mm-hmm. For another thing, it actually changed my relationship to my body awareness. So although I think I have quite high body awareness in a lot of ways, I actually had low body awareness in a lot of ways as well. Mm-hmm. And so what I noticed when I did the trauma work was that because of my Yin experience, I actually had a lot of interoceptive capacities where I could be like, oh, I can feel sensation. I can actually pinpoint where it is. I can actually be specific about it. I can feel where we've gone past the capacity. This is always like a little bit of a shifty thing, but what is 50%? What is 80%? Mm-hmm. What is a positive sensation? What is a therapeutic sensation? What is just a sensation? Yin's kind of uncomfortable. So like it built this whole vocabulary for me. Because one of the things that I find, this partly comes out of Yamada body rolling, but when you come out of a Yin shape, you have a moment mm-hmm. where you can reflect, and you can reflect on what's changed in your body and those sensations and those feelings. And then there's new sensations and new feelings that come up. And so it actually fast tracked a lot of the talking component of my trauma work as well, because in compassionate
interoception.
Yeah. In compassionate inquiry, we have to identify the somatic experience of what is happening. And so I can drop right into, it's a burning in my chest. It feels like it's, I've done it a few times on this podcast where I can use descriptions mm-hmm, mm-hmm. and give examples. And so that's helpful because I wasn't sitting there, and that's another modality where to finish the program, I had to do hours and hours of work with clients. And I certainly noticed that there's a huge difference between my entry door and quite often what will happen in a traumatized person is we just shut off the body. There's no signals. Mm-hmm. It's like, we sit here and it's like, Houston is not answering the call.
Yeah. It's like, if you look down, you're like, oh yeah, I do have a body.
Yeah.
Anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it actually gave me a physical kind of practice where I could just slowly do that without also having to address the trauma. And I think to this day, that's part of why it's helpful for me, because it can be in my body, I can have the experience where I'm like, it's not as neutral as restorative yoga, but mm-hmm. where it's pretty neutral. There's a sensation happening. I can actually be with an uncomfortable sensation and not panic. As long as, I'm not in a teacher training. And I can start to name and put words to it and identify it. And actually, especially for folks with complex trauma that's relational, that's one of the things that we actually didn't get in our developmental years. So we didn't have somebody saying, hey, you must be sad right now. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What does your body feel like right now? And so I can actually kind of use it even to reparent myself in a way that's not, it's not exactly parenting, but it's like, oh, cool. I feel a sensation in my glute and I'm still safe. I'm still here. I'm still in this room. I'm still, and if I'm not comfortable, can I adjust it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can come out. So for me, it actually was, it was an adjunct as well to the other trauma work that I did, because it developed that skill set. It developed the nervous system safety. It developed that choice making. It developed, you know, there was a whole bunch of pieces that when I did take the trauma center training, I'm like, I recognize this. You know, maybe there's different languaging around it. And there's certainly differences in the practices. Absolutely. But, you know, I think it's super important to say that there are a ton of people that have no idea that they have trauma. And so if that's the case, are they really going to go do trauma work? Are they going to go to a trauma class? Are they going to go to a trauma therapist? Probably not.
I just want to pause for a moment and highlight what you just said. Dear yoga teacher, are you listening? If you're working with humans, you're working with trauma.
Yeah.
That everybody has some kind of trauma in their life.
Yeah.
Some of it is complex trauma. It's all different things. You know, I mean, everyone's been through a death, a divorce, a car accident, and then there's the complex stuff, the childhood stuff, the abuse. So yes, are people coming to yoga saying, yeah, actually I'm here to work with my trauma? Odds are probably not. Now, unless of course they've already been working with their trauma, maybe they're seeing a therapist, they're doing a lot of this work, and then the therapist says, hey, you might want to try, then sure. But like, are they walking in the door with that? Nope. They're probably walking in the door because they're anxious, or they're this hurts, or they're that hurts, or they're stressed, or they just want to be more flexible, or whatever it is. And
I get a lot of folks who are in pain. So let's not miss that one.
Yeah, they're in persistent pain, whether, you know, physically. And so that's what they're coming in the door with. But when they come, they're bringing their whole selves.
Yeah.
And trauma is part of them whole selves that shows up for the practice. So I'd love for you to touch on, now that you've done your yin training, you've been working through your own journey, and now you've done this trauma training. I'd love to hear a bit more about like how that's helped, and has it shifted how you work with people? And if so, how?
So at the end of the day, when we talk about trauma, I think that there's still a little bit of a misunderstanding in terms, or there can be, it can be an event, but it also can be unprocessed material. And those things don't necessarily need to be huge things. So I believe it's Peter Levine who talks about, you know, we often think about something as a minor as being ignored. Well, that can't be a trauma, for example. And he's like, you know, take a 2-year-old, lock them in a room and ignore them and see how that goes. And it's not going to go very well. But whether that particular child finds that a trauma or not, it kind of is
it's very individual.
It's very individual. Yes. Thank you. So what we're actually dealing with in many cases is a lack of awareness that we have it, and how we actually can kind of move that through the body. And so what I've really learned from, I've done trainings with Peter Levine's somatic experiencing. I've done Gabor Mate's compassion inquiry. I've dug over there at the trauma center. So that's Bessel's work. So I kind of have hit the big three. The messaging from all of them is the same. It's relationships. So we're co-regulating with other people. It's moving the body, and that trauma is really when it gets stuck in the body. So my work as a body worker, as a movement specialist, it's going to, as Yin did for me, it's going to unearth this stuff, because when we start to open up the body, when we start to move the body, especially when we have a relationship with a practitioner, which somebody would with me, there's going to be safety that's actually created that suddenly allows some of those repressed components. And it's actively happened right here in my studio since taking those trainings. People are like, I just had a memory of this thing that happened, you know? And so what, for me as a practitioner, I now have the skill sets and the capacities and the regulation to actually I mean, I can offer them information, I can offer them practices, but I can most often offer a regulated response with compassion. That's actually how we got the trauma in the first place. So if you take that example of the 2-year-old locked in the room, there was nobody to talk to about it. They're having this huge emotional reaction. They're having a body response, because emotions and body responses always, always, always go together. We don't have one without the other. They don't have regulation. And then probably if the kid was actually locked in the room, there's a high chance that what happened is there's an adult who comes onto the scene that's like, quit it, stop your noise. And that's where the trauma actually is. It's not the fact that they were locked in the room. It's the fact that they weren't allowed to have their authentic response. And so I can offer myself and my clients a blueprint for, here's what an authentic regulated response looks like. Here's a new pathway so that your nervous system doesn't have to go into like, wow, we're in danger, we're in trouble. When somebody's triggered, they can have the trigger, and then can we move their body? How do we move that trigger out of the body? You know, I'll still get triggered. It's so the trauma work doesn't, you know, I really hate the word healing, because what it implies is that like you go through this work and that now you're done. You're not going to have these responses anymore. That's not what happens for me. Like I still have the responses, but I can be like, oh, I'm triggered right now. And I can feel the wave coming through my body. And then I can do some self-care, and I can be like, maybe call a friend, regulate, get some validation that like, this is, you know, this is an experience that is happening to me and it's legitimate. And then do some self-care afterwards, or maybe I take a bath or I do a yin practice. And then I also can do preventative work. And that's really, I've also kind of really heaped that onto clients, which is like, you know, that I remember taking your work. You were always big on home practices and like doing things in between. And that for me is still, that I've doubled down on that. Like, you know, if a client's in here for an hour a week, they have 167 hours a week that they're not with me. So like, can we do some yin in the middle so that, you know, maybe your nervous system doesn't have to take work stress and environmental stress and weather stress and then this trigger that happens and then like blow it up into this big bonfire in the backyard. Maybe we can just like tamp down a few of those by let the nervous system come down, and so that we're not always kind of just building fires and then extinguishing them. So I think that what's changed for me, I would say this about every single thing that I'm trained in, is I do my own shit and then it informs my experience of my own body. And then that informs kind of my approach with my clients. Do I think that since taking trauma training, I mean, I have had some clients who've continuously been in here they well predate that work. There's nothing about me as a human, or that I've kind of done a 360-degree shift where they're like, whoa, I don't understand what's happening now. But what it is really is an offer that if the thing comes up, it's very yin, actually. It's like we have choices. There's an offer for something different on the other side. So like if somebody comes in with body pain, I'm not going to be like, well, let's address your trauma. Some people go there, some people don't. That's fine.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not attached to that.
I would say you're underselling one thing though, is that inevitably you dealing with your trauma and you learning how to regulate and you being less on the ceiling as a cat.
Yes.
Inherently will affect how you're working with those.
Oh yeah. Yes. You're right.
Even those like long-term folks. And so even if they haven't like verbalized that there's a shift probably in working with you, I'm sure they felt it simply by the being of your own presence. Like when you talked about working with me, part of what was good about it was the energy that I had while working with you. And I'm sure that is now translating with them as well, is that, oh, like Janis is just more grounded now. And, you know,
that's valid.
And the ability to hold what I call brave space, because I think safe space is not really accurate.
Let's not do that. Yeah.
Yeah. But like your ability to be regulated and to witness them when they're having that experience, I think probably is felt, would be my thought. Yeah.
That's probably true. And I haven't directly asked people, but you know, I for sure have had the experience since doing those trainings, and it was pretty predictable, but there's some shift and turnover in some of my other relationships, or some of the decisions that I make about people or things, or social media sites or Instagram pages or whatever in my life, where I'm just like, yeah, this isn't a fit, because I end up in environments where they're overly negative or overly toxic, or there's always drama. And I've just purged those things and made them go away. So I think in general, I mean, you're absolutely right, because I'm coming into this space with less personal dramas in my life, just in general, because the trauma work, if nothing else, like even if, let's say, there's no other shift in me, it's just getting rid of that top 25% of life drama that wasn't adding anything. But, you know, I was definitely someone who before would enjoy going on to, let's say, a social media page that I knew I wasn't going to agree with, and then getting all kind of like, you know,
riled up,
puffy about it. And
yeah,
like, you don't have to spend very much time on social media to realize, like, a lot of people
like 5 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. Because it's a place where you can safely feel emotion, and it feels like that's the cause of it, but it isn't. It's just a way to actually like have an emotion and feel some aliveness. And I'm like, I don't need to do that anymore. And I don't enjoy it anymore. Like authentically, I don't. So, you know, for sure, I'm bringing less drama and there's less kind of like puppy cockfighting energy happening.
That's hilarious. So I think we should, we'll slowly start to wrap it up, but I would love for you to tell first of all, thank you for coming in, for sharing your story. And I would love to hear a little bit in a moment about, how people can work with you. But before we get there, I have some questions.
Oh yeah. It's
my icebreaker questions.
Yes.
So some of these are funny or fun, and some of them are more soulful. Do your best and see how you do. Okay. So the first question is coffee or tea?
It's definitely coffee, but I wish it was tea.
Okay. Favorite ice cream flavor?
I mean, I went straight to like this brand here in Calgary called Righteous Gelato, and I'm like, oh man. And then I was having like a little argument in my head. I think they make several dairy-free like chocolate flavors that are like absolutely crazy good.
Yum. Finish this sentence. One thing people often get wrong about me.
Oddly, one thing people often get wrong about me is if they have only encountered me on social media, they often think I'm really tall, and I'm like 5'4". And I'm like, I don't even know where this idea comes from, but I'm actually 5'4". So
interesting.
I know.
big presence, perhaps.
It happens all the time. They're like, oh, I didn't realize. I thought you were 5'8". That's the most common thing. I'm like, no, definitely never have been 5'8", won't ever be 5'8".
Oh, interesting.
Not sure. Yeah.
A pop culture vice.
Oh, I for sure love celebrity gossip, and I shouldn't, but but I do. I love it.
Guilty pleasure.
Yeah.
Finish this sentence. When I'm not practicing yoga, I am.
I'm most likely in my personal life right now, I'm a huge volunteer. So I'm probably out in the city somewhere volunteering and dressing up in somebody's volunteer costume or outfit, doing something
fun. One weird fact about you.
A weird fact? What do we define as a weird fact?
I don't know, maybe anything where it's like, it seems normal to you, but someone else has been like, hey, you, like for me, for example, it's that I eat a ridiculous amount of pickles. That's, it's like and I didn't realize how weird it was until my partner said, you'll sit down and eat a bowl of pickles like most people would eat ice cream. And I was like, oh, yes, that's weird.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I've never watched the Titanic. I've never watched most movies. I don't really like movies, but yes, I've never watched the Titanic.
I'm not going to say you're missing much, to be honest. I mean, I think
No,
I
probably
enjoyed it
not.
well. I enjoyed it well
Probably
enough
not.
at the time, but I don't think it's a
Yeah.
deal breaker for your life. That's for sure.
No, not at all. But people often are very surprised because I'm a huge podcast listener. I read books. I absorb basically everything, except I'm super out of every loop. Like you even noticed, I gave like, actually, I've never watched the Barbie movie either. So, you know,
Me neither.
I was just going to say, like, I just gave an old movie reference, but like, you know, it's something that basically 100% of people have seen. Probably I haven't. So people are always surprised by that because I absorb literally everything else in my environment. Like I'm an amoeba, except when it comes to movies, I'm like, don't care.
Because you're too busy reading books and listening to podcasts.
Yeah, that's true.
What the world needs now is
Yin yoga.
nice.
I mean, I think just the transformation on a personal level that a physical practice can give you. I'm going to expand that answer actually. Like I see a lot of, and I get a lot of advice to create these quick reels on social media that are about information, like top 3 tips to avoid back pain, for example. We need practices. We do not need more information. So what the world needs now, and I also think we need to slow it down, have some quiet, and like, trust me, I'm not the person that 10 years ago thought I would ever say those words in one sentence. But that, I think it is yin, where it's like, it's a practice. You're quiet, you're slower, you're making your own choices.
And we don't need interoception.
Totally. We don't need more tips. We don't need more information, even though like I'm a self-identified junkie of all the things, but the world needs more yin. Let's bring it.
That's good. I like it. Best answer yet. Not to stroke your competitive side.
Right. I was like, you just fed a whole little.
Although I think mine in my solo episode was love. So, you know, that's a close second. Oh, yeah. One thing I wish people knew about Yin Yoga.
It's not boring.
Thank you. That's a good one.
Yeah. I think that it can be hard to have people understand it because it's like, as soon as you're like, it's on the floor, you just shattered their version of like what yoga is, because yoga to most folks is do your salutations and you do your warriors and stuff. And then you're like, it's on the floor. And I can see people's faces being like, and then when I explain, you know, it's long held postures, I can see eyes glazing over because their thought is like, well, that sounds boring. And I think it's not boring because when you actually have capacity, and I certainly didn't the day I met you, but interoception is never boring. There's a really interesting landscape and a little Amazon forest inside you of sensations that are constantly changing and evolving. And, you know, when I started during the shutdowns of the pandemic, I started doing a significantly longer yoga practice every day. And this is like years into my practice. And I was like, whoa, I'm super shocked at how every day is different. And every day is different when there's nothing else happening.
Yes.
Every day in the world is the same, but every day inside me is different. And I was totally gobsmacked by that. So when you actually start to really explore that and discover that, there's no such thing as it being boring unless you think that your body and your experiences and your thoughts are boring, in which case, I don't know. That's definitely a trauma therapy issue. But I think the idea that the exercise has to be exciting and it has to be basically entertainment.
Yeah. That's exactly the word. Yeah. Entertainment. But it does, I think, take also, like you were mentioning too, like it takes a skilled teacher to maybe point people to that. Like, actually, it's not boring. It's just that now, instead of focusing on everything out here, you're going to focus on everything in here, which is actually highly entertaining, especially if you've been not paying attention to it much.
But it can actually be like, when you go from being outside into like a pitch dark room, probably with sunglasses on, at first you're like, I can't see anything.
Yeah. There's nothing going on. Yeah.
That's what the experience can be like for people. So it's like, how do we look around in there? and it's not boring. It's actually the most interesting element of your life, but it can take a bit of time to kind of, for your eyes to adjust and to be like, oh, hey,
Totally.
look what's in here.
Is there anything else I forgot to ask you that you would like to add?
I just have a lot of gratitude that my life led to a Google search that led to you, because it actually was really life-changing in terms of, I don't know if I actually would have discovered yin any other way. And then that leads to, I kind of pause there, because I'm like, well, and then would I have discovered that I had trauma? Would I have, because it would have been really easy to be like, oh, that doesn't apply to me. Nothing to see here, and just skip over all that material. And so I have no idea what would have happened in my life without that Google search. But I think that I'm a great example of kind of dipping a toe into this world can just you're entering into a whole new thing that you don't even, that's not what I was seeking that day. I wasn't like, oh, I need to take my yoga teacher training, and I need to offer this to clients, and I need to do 3 trauma certifications, and I need to deal with my own traumas. Not at all. So I think I just actually want to express to you like a lot of gratitude for you guiding me, holding my hand, being like, hey friend, let's do this.
Let's try this thing out. Yeah.
And making it so accessible and available, and just staying with me. Like, I mean, this has been years now, and you've stuck with me as it's all evolved, including when I did a teacher training. You weren't ever competitive or like, oh, I'm losing a student over this or anything. You were just like, great, let's do it. I'll see you there.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I often wonder, I had Paul's DVD back when it was still only on DVD. And I happened to be walking by a studio and just went in randomly to an Ashtanga studio, not even a style I practice or enjoy, but I went in to buy a bolster and saw that poster that Paul was coming. Like, I often wonder, had I not gone in there, I like to think that I would have somehow still found yin at some point, but we don't know. And we don't know how long it would have taken. And would I have discovered it through somebody trained by him first and not had that sort of direct or one step down transmission of what this is?
I mean, the pandemic for me was not a pleasant experience. There was like a whole lot of
well, that's good to know.
Do not repeat on that. But I've often thought like, wow, had I not actually had this experience in my body and intellectually and done this work, I used to talk about how the pandemic was basically like going to a retreat, only you didn't sign up for it, and there's no guidance, and there's no teacher, and there's no practices. And I walked into that period of my life with those in hand and tucked under my shoulder, and I'd already been practicing for years at that point. And without that, I'm like, whoa, I don't even know what would be happening right now, but it would not be good.
Janis, my friend, tell people where they can find you.
So my business name is My Body Couture, which is 3 words. My, M-Y, body, B-O-D-Y, couture, C-O-U-T-U-R-E. So that is the portal for all of the things to find me online.
And it's .com?
Oh yes, I'm at the .com. And then if I'm active on a social media site, that's the same handle that I use everywhere other than Instagram, which is my given legal name instead.
I will, of course, link all of that business below in the show notes. So if you want to check Janis out, you want to follow her on Instagram, or, hop on her website, you can do that. Because you do virtual as well, right? In person and virtual. Yeah.
Great. I do. Yes. So
if someone's dealing with persistent pain and they're like, what is the answer? What is happening here? They can book a session with you.
Absolutely. So I have a physical studio in Calgary, and I also have classes that happen not here, but they're only once a week. So I'm primarily a one-to-one teacher. I love the way you described it when we were off camera, but I'm basically a yoga therapist that uses other modalities, but also does yoga.
Yeah.
So I'm using,
I mean, for the yoga teachers, because we always think of like a 200 and a 500, and then there's yoga therapy. It's like, I always, when I'm trying to describe what Janis does, I'm like, she's like a yoga therapist, but if you use things like Pilates and Yamana body rolling and all the other stuff, so it's like that level of training and experience and know-how, but not under the umbrella of yoga therapy.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
We just in the other movement modalities, we have a different structure, but I have thousands of hours of training, but that's right. So I'm using yin and trauma sensitive yoga are components of my work. Absolutely. But there's other pieces that you've already alluded to. And there's some more, such as critical alignment therapy. And then I put them together into what that body needs, and away we go.
They're like the tools in your tool belt.
That's right.
Pull them out as needed. All right. Thank you so much, my friend. And I'll say our proper goodbyes in a moment when I hit stop. But thank you for coming and hanging out with me.
Thank you. I was excited to talk about yin and trauma, and hopefully it opens up a conversation with at least one person who's listening inside their own head or with somebody else.
It will for sure. Thanks, friend.
Thank you.